As you noted, Mr. Chairman, January 6th was not an isolated event. The problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York, not going away anytime soon. Of course, that was FBI Director Christopher Wray warning us about something, unfortunately, he was all too correct about. Those comments were from Wray's testimony before Congress a few months following the January 6th attack, addressing a situation we've only seen intensify since then. In the past year, we've seen extremist voices in this country grow louder. In fact, a bunch of them are now running to hold positions of power as elected officials. A new report released this morning by the Anti-Defamation League examines a sampling of the over 100 people they are tracking who they characterize as problematic political candidates running for office this year. Problematic because they promote extreme views, associate with extremists, or promote potentially dangerous conspiracy theories. The list of candidates, which the ADL notes continues to grow on a near daily basis, includes at least a dozen candidates with explicit connections to extremist groups or movements, including white supremacists, anti-government extremists, and members of the far-right Proud Boys. The report also finds that at least 45 candidates running for office this year have lent credence to the QAnon conspiracy theory in some way. These candidates running at a time Axios describes as a perfect storm for extreme politicians. Axios reports this, quote, redistricting and a flood of departing incumbents are paving the way for more extreme candidates in this year's midterm elections. At least 19 House districts in 12 states are primed to attract such candidates. Hard partisans running in strongly partisan districts. It's according to an Axios analysis of districts as measured by the Cook Political Report's Partisan Voter Index. Quote, open seats are the biggest accelerant of extremism and breeding grounds for ideological warfare, Cook's David Wasserman tells Axios. One open seat that's received a lot of attention in the past few months is the one being vacated by Senator Rob Portman, who counts as moderate these days. Today, one of the most extreme voices currently serving in the U.S. House weighed in on that race, picking her favorite. Marjorie Taylor Greene endorsed former venture capitalist and writer of Hillbilly Elegy J.D. Vance in the Republican primary, saying he is, quote, the conservative warrior that the entire American First movement needs. Wow. Vance, once a critic of former President Donald Trump, has done a 180 a couple times over, running now as a Trump loyalist who has built up an incendiary online presence, and Greene's endorsement is sure to boost his standing among the MAGA base. Extremism on the ballot is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jonathan Greenblatt is here. He's the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, author of the book It Could Happen Here. Also joining us, MSNBC national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi, former assistant director of counterintelligence at the FBI, and Carol Lennox here, Washington Post national investigative reporter, also an MSNBC contributor. Jonathan Greenblatt, J.D. Vance is a good case study because he's made a choice. He knows what extremism is and he knows what it leads to. And he, I believe, endorsed Evan McMullin in the 2016 Republican primary because he was, I think his word was revolted or repulsed by Donald J. Trump. Now accepting and celebrating the endorsement of one of the Republican caucus's most extreme and frankly nutty members, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Talk about how the greenlighting and the permission structure from people who know better ushers in this more extreme sort of block in American elected officials.
Yeah, I mean, this is really a remarkable moment in American politics, and I would think that Ronald Reagan is turning over in his grave when he thinks that these are the inheritors of his legacy. Look, Marjorie Taylor Greene, with her Jewish space lasers and her compatriots in the QAnon movement, the idea that she is the arbiter of who is, an able member of the U.S. Senate should terrify all of us, really, when she is the one doing the political hand-picking. And as we released in our report today, it's alarming when you consider the surge of extremism that we're seeing, Nicole, all across the country. We're tracking races in more than 32 states. And as you said, the list grows every single day with people running for office who are former white supremacists and proud of it. We're associated with the Oath Keepers, with the Proud Boys movement. And I should make a note of this. They are not only running for, let's say, the U.S. Senate like J.D. Vance, they're running at the like for county commissioner seats, for secretaries of state, so they can influence the election process. So think about that. People who don't believe in the legitimacy of our democracy want to undermine the democracy from within by controlling it. That should scare everyone.
The report did scare me. I'm going to read something from it. It says this, one example of an extremist candidate. Self-described lifetime member of the anti-government Oath Keepers, Wendy Rogers, a Republican member of the Arizona State Senate running for re-election, has appeared on the anti-Semitic True News streaming platform and tweeted support for Nick Fuentes, a white supremacist leader and organizer. She is also one of the loudest voices in the 2020 election denial movement. In a December 9th, 2021 GAV post, she wrote, "Trump won, and anyone who doesn't see that the election was stolen is a fool." There's so much about her. Maybe she's not a perfect example, but I want to understand the criteria. Obviously, being a lifetime member of the Oath Keepers, adhering to and furthering the lies about an election conspiracy that we all know aren't true, being a part of the white supremacist movement and a backer of Nick Fuentes. I mean, just talk about the varying things that will land someone on the registry of extremist candidates.
Yeah, that was a comment she made on Gab, which is Andrew Torba, a notorious anti-Semite's kind of version of Twitter. And it only gets worse from there, if you can imagine that. So we found 3 types of candidates, at least 24 who've expressed admiration for or appeared in public alongside extremists like Nick Fuentes, who's essentially a neo-Nazi. At least 45 candidates running for office who have lent credence to, or in some way, the QAnon conspiracy theory, right? We all know about that. And then dozens of candidates who promoted disproven conspiracy theories that are dangerous, like around the legitimacy of the 2020 election, the idea that the January 6th insurrection were just a group of tourists milling about the Capitol, lies about the deep state, or the COVID-19 pandemic, that it's somehow a bioweapon engineered by the Jewish people or the federal government or George Soros, take your pick. I mean, all of this stuff is frightening, and in the past there has always been a lunatic fringe, Nicole. The difference is today, the fringe is in front and center, it would seem, of our political process, like a way that we've never seen before.
I mean, Carol, you and I talk so many days about my pressing you about what Republicans who know better. J.D. Vance isn't in that category anymore, but certainly not because he's undereducated. He chooses this path to align himself with the extremists. But we talk so much about that old guard. We've talked about some of the folks who populated national security posts in the Trump era. And I wonder, I guess not if there's any remorse, their actions speak for themselves, but I wonder if there's any sense that it can be addressed from a security standpoint, or are we simply living in this place where domestic violent extremism is at this inextricable intersection with elected Republican officials?
You know, I think you're turning your laser to a really important question, because just as the Anti-Defamation League's report comes out telling you that, hey, by the way, these people are running for Senate, but also running to try to control state and county elections, what about whether these folks will be in charge of deciding American security decisions? How will they make good decisions if they don't, and they automatically revile experts who spent decades in understanding China, in understanding Russia, in figuring out the geopolitical pressures that could come to bear and could harm our country? We don't want people rejecting what they've decided is the deep state and is actually the group of people who are supposed to help protect our country. It's very worrisome. I'd also say there's another worrisome thing about the ADL's report, which is that the Post, the Washington Post, where I work, have done a very similar assessment. Numbers of candidates running for state and also national office, and the percentage of them who were promoting the idea of the big lie. What's interesting is how much that number has swollen in just a few months' time. It's really like this, I wouldn't say tidal wave, but I think it's apt to describe it as a flotilla now, a real flotilla right in the center of our election discussion, our campaign discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, Frank, you and Carol have been part of our coverage of the audit in Arizona, and why did we cover that every day? Because it was our sense that it could radicalize people who thought there had been fraud. Because if there hadn't been fraud, why would you count the ballots again? And efforts to do that kind of recounting in other places most likely contributed to, and I think a swelling is putting it mildly. There is an explosion in support and a renewed acceptance and mainstreaming of the January 6th insurrection and adherence to the big lie. It is a litmus test in a way that it wasn't on election day. And I wonder if you can speak to this new reporting in the Daily Beast that domestic violent extremists and racially motivated extremists in the U.S. have been developing plans to attack the U.S. electric sector. According to an intelligence bulletin from the Department of Homeland Security that was issued this week and obtained by the Daily Beast, DVEs have developed credible, specific plans to attack electricity infrastructure since at least 2020, identifying the electric grid as a particularly attractive target, given its interdependency with other infrastructure sectors. I have to just say, I am old enough to remember when I was involved in efforts to declassify intelligence about foreign terrorists targeting the same kinds of systems and critical infrastructure. It's surreal to read that about domestic threats.
When the head of the FBI says something like the domestic threat is now equal to or greater than the international threat, we better pay attention to that because he's got the data and the intel in front of him, and that's essentially what he's been saying in public testimony. The whole domestic terror movement, the domestic violent extremism movement is really based on two pillars: hate, race and ethnic-based hate, and that will throw in white nationalism there, and then the big lie, the deception and disinformation that they've been suckered into accepting. The problem is, because we live in our own echo chambers, because they are so hard to break through into and expose to sunshine and truth and show them the court results, the fact that there's no systemic fraud, there's been no fraud found, certainly not any kind that would overturn an election. You can't get through to them. They believe what they believe fervently to the point of religious fervor. And that, coupled with the demonization of everyone else who doesn't see it like them, results in what I'm now calling a semi-permanent violent insurgency inside the United States. So when groups and organizations start talking about targeting our power grid, our energy infrastructure, we've had to worry about that, as you say, from international terrorists and hackers. Now we've got to worry about the guy down the block, the militia group up in the hills, many, many people, and it's becoming legitimized when we're even here talking, Nicole, about people running for office and being believed as credible candidates with these extremist beliefs. We now have this mainstreaming of madness, lunacy. That's where we are right now, and the national security challenge is incredibly significant.
Jonathan,